Ladies and gentlemen, Mad Doggy Dog in the building. We're going to cover a fair amount today. We're going to cover first and foremost the incredible parade that took place yesterday. We're going to take what else are we going to take? We're going to take the Champions League final. We're not going to shy away from it. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about the TalkSport AFTV situation. Simon Jordan, Robbie Lyles. There's been a bit of back and forth. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, I suppose, my point of view on just the roundup of the season, looking forward to next season. I think that last bit, who knows whether I'll get to that. The video might get a little bit long, so we might save that for the next one. But first and foremost, 1.5 million people. The scenes were just incredible. And I think it's scary hours for the haters right now, man. If you're a hater, like if you've got that hater gene in you, it's long for you right now because Arsenal, like what you're just seeing, not just in London, but you're seeing all over the world, in Africa, in the US, in Asia, is that these parades are going on like globally, right? And people are really starting to understand just Arsenal, how significant Arsenal's presence in is globally within the culture of football. And yeah, we really have been a sleeping giant. We have been a sleeping giant for the last 22 years. And yeah, in this new world of financial fair play, I think we're gonna be right up there. I don't think we're gonna fall away. I don't think it's gonna be how it was for City when they were cheating. I don't think it's gonna be how it was for Chelsea when they were cheating. Uh, but we're gonna be right up there. And it was just, yeah, it was incredible to see. Personally, I didn't go just because I went last Sunday after we lifted the trophy. And the reason I wanted to go is that I knew there was a chance to look, we weren't the favorites against PSG. And I wanted to go and celebrate when the only thing on my mind was the fact that we had won the league, right? And and it was, you imagine there was 1.5 million people there despite us losing on penalties in a signal. Yeah, imagine if we had won. Like it would, as it was, people couldn't get home. And that's one of the reasons I didn't go, just to be a pussy. Um, I just didn't fancy all the dramas getting home and just like who knows what road's going to be closed and this and that. And yeah, I just didn't fancy all that BS, to be honest. Um, Even trying to get back on Sunday when we weren't even, yeah, there was no parade. It was just an impromptu thing. We lifted the trophy at Crystal Palace, but still thousands came to the Emirates. And honestly, like that memory will live with me forever. And yeah, I was just happy with that. And it was hot and yeah, yeah, forget all that, to be honest. But shout out to all the people that went and had a great time. Now, let's talk about the Champions League. Um, Signal, you know, um, I think you got to give a lot of credit to the players. They pushed PSG the whole way, where I think the only team that was undefeated in the tournament, PSG lost games, and yeah, Arsenal were the only team to not lose in regular time. We lost on penalties um, in the last game. Other than that, we had the best record in the tournament, and there's fine margins at this elite level of sport. Um, so yeah, that's the way I look at it as a fan. If I'm looking at it objectively, as not as an Arsenal fan, but just an armchair analyst, if you will, I think you have to say that I was a little bit disappointed that Arsenal didn't give it more of a go until we conceded. After we conceded, all of a sudden we could have possession. All of a sudden we could knock it about. All of a sudden we could start creating chances of our own. And it's disappointing that we had to concede that goal in order to pull our socks up and really make a fist of it, right? It's a final. It's the Champions League, and I am a little bit, even as a fan, I'm disappointed in Arteta's tactics. And I know people say that, oh, you've been doing that all season. We really haven't, right? We've been doing it where we felt we needed to, but it hasn't been as bad as rival fans have been making out. Um, but yeah, in the Champions League, it really was. It really was. We were pretty negative, and we didn't really give it a go. And I think that in my humble opinion, and a lot of people were saying this 2, 3 months ago, or even a month ago, and have now completely changed their tune after the fact because the emotion has got too much for them. But the league really was the bare minimum. Like we had to win the league at a minimum, given that Arteta's had 6.5 years and he spent a bill. And I understand the argument that, other teams have spent money, Chelsea have spent money, Man United have spent money, etc. But nobody, I don't believe, in the history of the Premier League has had this much time, this much consistent money, right, in various different windows, and this much political support, right? Some managers will get time, some managers will get money. Very few managers get political support the way that Mikel has, right? And to have all three simultaneously, I think winning the league really was the minimum. And I think what would have really, really impressed me and maybe changed my mind on Arteta long term was if we had won that Champions League, if he had done something to demonstrate that, yeah, he's an elite manager, he can make a difference. And I didn't feel like the the first 11 was brave enough, right? I think he went very safe with Odegaard and Havertz. And listen, I understand Havertz scored a great goal, and kudos to Havertz for, you know, seeing it through on the break and a really, really neat finish. But overall, his contribution to the game was minimal. And Odegaard, who really hasn't played much this season, hasn't really had much of an impact this season. Um, I think got more minutes than he warranted. And when you've got a guy who's banged in more than 20 goals this season, first player to do so since Alexis Sanchez, um, and when you've got a player who's demonstrated he's a moments player on a big occasion in the form of Eze, like to leave Eze and Gyökeres on the bench, I think personally was a mistake. I said before the final, I would have liked to have seen those two start. Um, and I think like that was Mikel. That was Mikel. He stuck to what he knows. He clearly has a very good relationship with those two players and he trusts them. And ultimately, um, you know, again, I give credit to Havertz for the breakaway, but like if you look at his overall contribution in the game, and this is a final, you can't just have one moment, right? You got to be contributing the whole time you're on the pitch. I felt both of those players were ineffectual, and I thought the timing and the order of the substitutions, as always with Arteta, were pretty suboptimal, to be honest. And and I think like I don't want to be negative because this has been a positive season for Arsenal and it's a positive time, right? But I think the main thing that bothered me, and I said this in the WhatsApp groups, that the main thing I was worried about was just Arteta having a bozo moment. Is he gonna play Rice at right back? Is he gonna do something stupid? Is he gonna play Raya at left wing, right? Is he gonna do something dumb like leaving Raya out of the final and like he did in the Carabao Cup, right? And for me, that moment came in the penalties. Like how and ultimately the buck stops with the manager, right? I got nothing against Gabriel and I have very little against Eze, right? These guys are just players. They're human beings. The pressure gets to them. In the case of Eze, you know, he's probably our least talented ball striker on the pitch. I don't know if there was a less talented ball striker on the pitch, right? He should never been allowed to take a fifth penalty. He should never been allowed to take any of the first five, but the fifth, especially with us going second, no way, no way, hell no. Yeah, and a lot of people have been giving stick to Madueke, who was fighting Cole Palmer at Chelsea about taking penalties when they were 4-0 up. And when we really needed him, and he's come on for Sacco, who's probably our number one penalty taker, and he's come on for him, and he didn't want to take one. Um, and Zubimendi as well, who's a lot more. I understand he's played alternate between a six and an eight, but he's still scored goals for us. He's still a very attack-minded player, and he's a ball striker, right? How those guys didn't get put into a fifth, whether they want it or not, I don't understand. And ultimately, the buck stops with Arteta for that, right? If you like, ultimately, as the manager, you decide the lineup, and to let Gabriel, who's probably not even like the best ball striker out of our centre backs, go fifth is a catastrophic error of somebody who's never really been ready for this role, but has been the beneficiary of a number of, yeah, being in the right time at the right place. And I think, honestly, if anybody other than the players deserves the most credit for us winning the league this season, I'll give it to Andrea Berta for building a squad that was just undeniable. You know, I've been saying from like pretty much since November time that I didn't have a lot of faith in Arsenal, but I had less faith in everybody else, right? And we just had the kind of squad that one player could go out, another player could come in, and we could just grind out results, which we did. But ultimately, if you look at the entire season, we never won a single game that we weren't supposed to win, right? We never beat City away when we needed to, um, or we didn't beat Liverpool away when we needed to, um, and we didn't ultimately beat PSG in the final. Um, and Yeah, listen, we really ground it out, and kudos to that, right? I'm not one of these anti-Arsenal haters. There's a skill to grinding things out, but I think if we're praising Arteta as a manager, like squads grind things out. Like managers make a difference. Managers like win games that they're not supposed to win. And I don't think, honestly, I like just being realistic, I don't think Arteta's the man. I think he's a very good man manager. I think he's a good morale builder. I think he's done a lot of really interesting things. I think like there's a future for him in organizational psychology. You know, um, he talks a lot about building a culture, and some of those I think have been impactful, and I think some of those have probably are red herrings, and he's kind of become a bit of a legend in his own mind. But if you're talking about football manager, if you're talking about big decisions and big tactical uh, uh, inferences, yeah, honestly, I've not seen it personally, but yeah, I'd much rather be. Someone put in the comments, yeah, and I've wondered, did they put that because that's like my comfort word and I say it a lot. I've become a little bit self-conscious of that. I'm not self-conscious enough to stop doing it, clearly, but I was going to do it there, but I didn't. So PSG are clearly the biggest scumbag fan base on the planet. I mean, tearing up their city, let's be honest, a lot of that has to do with just the scummy demographic um, pockets that they have within that particular city that probably aren't that has no correlation to football, right? But best we don't go into that. Um, what we will go into, however, is just the utter hypocrisy of TalkSport and Simon Jordan. And one has to wonder whether they're actually that hypocritical and stupid and partly prejudice, or whether or not it's just an intentional tactic and a grift. Because Simon Jordan has come out and said, the reason why people hate Arsenal is because of AFTV and whatnot. And whilst if that statement's taken in isolation, there may be some truth to that, right? But the inference that Jordan makes is that AFTV have done something wrong and they somehow deserve it, and he described them as nitwits. And listen, I don't know how you could describe Robbie Lau as a nitwit, like looking at what he's built, looking at what he's created, the scale of what he's created, not just in AFTV and DR Sports, the level of impact that he's had on the YouTube football ecosystem. He's really the godfather of this game, and that is evident in TalkSport's own content, right? Where you can literally see the tracing paper from how they've essentially lifted a, a lot of Robbie's business model, but they've also lifted the talent, right? So these same people that they're describing as nitwits and minions and all of that, they're recruiting themselves, right, to go and work on TalkSport. And if you look at some of their content, which is basically like anti-Arsenal, it's not exactly the most highbrow, highfalutin, high vocabulary stuff, right? It's relatively low common denominator football banter, which is what some of DR Sports and AFTV's content is. Now, that's not all that it is, right? As somebody who's been watching AFTV pretty much since it was launched, right? And watches a lot of DR Sports content as well. They put out quite a diverse range of content, and they have a diverse range of participation and representation from across Arsenal's fan base, right? Across multiple age categories, ethnic, cultural categories, economic class categories. There's something for everyone on that channel, but you can't help but feel that what Simon Jordan is alluding to as to why people hate Arsenal is is probably um, in reference to people like Troops, right? And the way that he probably articulates himself and probably just the way that he looks, right? But to somehow frame that as an AFTV problem when, people like Troops aren't AFTV's only participants, and even if they were, so what? Like they're not doing anything wrong. You don't have to watch it, right? And if you don't like that type of thing, but the truth is that these algorithms and whatever goes viral is not down to the content creator, right? It's down to the market. The market decides what they want to watch. The market decides what they want to share and comment on, right? And perpetuate. And AFTV isn't in control of that. And it's also just a far cry from Obama, Blood Clark Yang, and all that kind of troops antics that it used to be, and the DT type of antics. Like I said, there's so much more to the content that they produce. So yeah, I just thought it was like embarrassingly hypocritical from TalkSport. And I think like Robbie is done a really quite admirable job in defending himself and speaking up for what he's created. Um, and and whilst I think Jordan probably has a point, as I mentioned, that people maybe don't like Arsenal because of AFTV. I think those people are just like incredibly ignorant, frankly, because as I said, AFTV put out all types of content. There really is something for every type of Arsenal fan, right? And it they can't really help what goes viral. And as far as the whole criticism of we the AFTV feed of negativity and they want Arsenal to lose so they get more views, like again. these people, they don't have a brain in their skull. Like if they had any sort of like intellectual horsepower, they would have figured out the correlation between AFTV's views is be an inverse correlation to the betting odds, right? That's how human psychology works, not just for AFTV, but also for TalkSport and also for any of these sports fan channels, because ultimately the probability of an outcome, the the easiest and most reliable way that you can measure that is by looking at the betting odds who do that for a living. And when you lose a game that you're supposed to win, right, it is therefore against the odds and a surprise result, and then people tune in to see the reaction to that. But equally, when Arsenal win games that they were historically supposed to have lost, right, and it's a surprise result to the upside, you see the same spike in the viewership. And you see that consistently across like team sports that have a tribal following, right? And it is also true for Talk Sport. So that whole argument is just like doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. And I suppose if I had to be a nitpicker, which I am, the only thing that I would say maybe Robbie could have done better, right, is to make that point. But the way he made it, he kind of gave anecdotal evidence of, hey, here's games where we've won and our views have gone through the roof, but just, you know, being able to explain exactly the nature of how those correlations work in relation to betting odds, I think would have been a little bit cleaner. But hey, shout out to shout out to AFTV, honestly, giving me hours of enjoyment, in victory and in defeat. Maybe not enjoyment, maybe more consolement, but yeah, um, and therapy. But I think, wow, I think I've covered most of it actually. In terms of looking forward to next season, I'll save that for our next video. Peace.